Ask yourself this: how would it feel to be made out into a victim when you don't want to be? Well, when Senator and former presidential candidate Tim Scott was turned into a political scapegoat on The View, I couldn't help but see where Tim's frustration over the race baiting and victimizing was coming from. But this time, there is something different you need to see, because just how persistent Sunny Hostin was in this clip really got the pushback it deserved from Tim Scott. Just watch this.
Senator, I am actually happy that you're here. We have some things in common. You grew up in a single-family household, single-mother household. I grew up with both of my parents, but raised in the Bronx projects amidst a lot of poverty and violence. And you are the first black senator elected in the South since the Reconstruction. That would be about 114 years. Yet you say that your life disproves leftist lies. And
Yes.
My question to you is, I'm the exception, right? You're the exception. Maybe even Miss Whoopi Goldberg is the exception.
Oh, she's definitely the
but we are not the rule.
Honestly, if there was ever a more perfect repudiation to Sunny Hostin's race-based assertions, it's sitting right next to her in the form of Senator Tim Scott. Yes, he's had his share of difficulties and discrimination along the way, but Tim Scott has refused to chalk that up to his race or his place in America. Another former presidential candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, said something similar on this that has stuck with me ever since, where he said that, quote, "Hardship is not a choice, but victimhood is a choice." It's clear that this fact holds true for people of diverse backgrounds as much in the case of Vivek as someone like Tim Scott. The senator has refused to call America a racist nation, instead believing that his life is a story that would only ever be real in a country like the United States. When that is the spirit and frame of your mind you're coming from, nothing is more frustrating than being singled out as the exception instead of the evidence that he is of the equal opportunities that America afforded him.
When it comes to racial inequality, it persists in 5 core aspects of life in the U.S. Economics, education, healthcare, criminal justice, and housing. At nearly every turn, these achievements were fought, threatened, and erased, most often by white violence. You have indicated that you don't believe in systemic racism. What is your definition of systemic racism?
Let me answer the question that you've answered.
Or does it even exist in your mind?
Let me answer the question this way. One of the things I think about, and one of the reasons why I'm on the show, is because of the comments that were made, frankly, on this show, that the only way for a young African-American kid to be successful in this country is to be the exception and not the rule. That is a dangerous, offensive, disgusting message to send to our young people today, that the only way to succeed is by being the exception.
If you see a degree of subtle aggressiveness in Tim Scott's tone, then there's a backdrop to his appearance on this panel that you need to know about. Prior to the senator's invitation, there had been a string of events with people like Joy Behar and Sunny Hostin coming at him on social media as some kind of token person of color that Tim Scott wants to be for the Republican Party. Most offensively, Sunny Hostin tweeted at him a picture of the main character from the movie Get Out, which is a horror film that takes racial tensions to a twisted extreme, with the caption, quote, "Tim Scott, America is not a racist country." Now, I love Jordan Peele and I loved Get Out, but when you see all of this in totality, you might start to ask why he'd even agree to go on a panel that has proven to be hostile to him and what he stands for. But Tim Scott made clear his intentions of going on the show in a prior interview on Fox News.
I'm just so curious about your appearance that you're getting ready to make on The View. Those ladies have had a lot to say about you when you weren't present at the table. You're going to be sitting with them, but they've attacked you on a personal level.
My goal on this show is not to go in there and defend myself. My goal is to defend people like you and defend other people who want to think for themselves.
So while you may see The View putting up a nice front for him, he understands exactly the kind of offensive and even arguably racist things that have been said about him on the show. And it was a mask-off moment when the panel was insistent on either making him out as a victim or else making him appear as someone whose success is only an exception that doesn't speak to a broader point about modern America.
I will tell you that if my life is the exception, I can't imagine.
But it is.
But it's not actually. It's
been 114 years.
Yeah. So the fact of the matter is, we've had an African American president, African American vice president. We've had 2 African Americans to be secretaries of the state. In my home city, the police chief is an African American who's now running for mayor. The head of the highway patrol for South Carolina is an African American.
Still
in
exceptions.
In 1975, there was about 15% employment in the African American community. For the first time in the history of the country, it's under 5%.
40% homelessness.
And 50%
of African Americans.
50% of the folks in our community.
Yet 13% of the population.
You had the chance to ask the question. I know that I've watched you on the show that you like people to be deferential and respectful, so I'm going to do the same thing.
That is true.
It's incredible how Sonny wants to bombard the senator with facts and statistics around things like homelessness that warrant a much deeper discussion, and then infer from it that America's racism is the basis for all of it. Of course, disparities and inequities exist, but to use that as a jumping board to assert America's systemic racism and make everyone successful in it an exception cannot simply be walked past without being challenged. Speaking of statistics, do you know that the dollar has lost over 10% of its purchasing power in the last 2 years alone? And at a time when your savings and investment lose their value in a volatile global economy, you need a company like Birch Gold to help you diversify into the time-proven stable asset of precious metals. If you're interested, do click the link in the description or text the FFIRA to 989898 to get started right away. It was a revelation to see how Sonny Hostin repeatedly interrupted the senator the moment he started pushing back against her attempts to paint him as a victim, and looking at much of what led up to his appearance on the show, perhaps that was the panel's intention from the start. Props to Tim Scott for finally breaking the bubble of their echo chamber and holding his intellectual ground despite being outnumbered on the panel.
What I'm suggesting is that yesterday's exception is today's rule. And for us to
so
suggest—
America has met its promise.
No, of course, the concept of America is that we are going to become a more perfect union. That in fact, the challenges that we face 50 years ago and 60 years ago should not be the same challenges that we face today. And here's the way that you measure that. When my mother was born, about 10% of African Americans got a high school degree, diploma. Today, it's over 90%. I believe that education is the closest thing to magic in America. So I'm about making sure that our kids have as many opportunities to succeed as possible.
That's such a great way to put it. The fact is, the American dream is not a destination. It is a pursuit and an ideal that we constantly strive toward and yet always fall short of. Have we reached closer to it than we have ever been? The best person to answer that question is not you or I, but the people that have gone before us. If people from 200 years ago or even just a few decades ago could be resurrected, they could attest to the fact that America has come farther than any other country in shedding the baggage of its history to create a level playing field for all. For Tim Scott, who's adamant on giving a positive and empowering message, nothing irks him more than someone like Sonny Hostin refusing to see what his life and message actually stand for. Right now, even though he's dropped out of the presidential race, Tim Scott as a senator will continue to serve as an important counterbalancing voice on the popular rhetoric we see around race relations in all of America.